Welcome to the conference. This is AMI Inside.
Welcome to this edition of AMI Inside, where we are in Toronto for the 14th Annual JOIN Conference. The Ontario Job Opportunity Information Network, or JOIN, offers a single point of access for job seekers, employers, and service providers, as well as educational services for employers to learn how to provide full inclusion in the workplace. This year's conference was hosted by CBC News personality Suhana Marchand.
And thank you for coming to Ontario JOIN's 14th Annual Employer Conference. And this year's theme is Think Beyond Checking a Box. Three things always happen to me at JOIN. I tear up over some story or other. I walk away feeling stronger. And I also walk away thinking, I need to do more. And those are all, in my mind, very good things. And that, I hope, will be the gift with which you leave today. And today we hope to equip all of you with the tools, the resources, the knowledge, you already have the heart, to take back to your companies and your organizations in order to create that inclusive workplace.
Emily Mahoney, Communications and Event Coordinator for JOIN, was responsible for the planning and execution of this year's conference. She tells us more about the event and the organization.
So the whole purpose of the conference is beyond checking a box. So a lot of people will be like, okay, I have a ramp, I have accessible washrooms, I'm good to go, whatever, and they move on to the next step. But we really want to encourage people to take a step further than that. There are so many things that can be done in the workplace that can accommodate all people of abilities rather than just doing what they should. There's so many other things so that everyone can be included in the workplace. So we're kind of like a third-party agency. Our whole point is trying to be a point of communication for all job seekers with disabilities, employers, as well as the service provider agencies. So we have employers, the job seekers come to us, we try and match with what jobs are available. If not, we then try and refer them to an agency where they can go through the employment supports in the agency-wide. And we also try and do trainings through like the conference and different job fairs, stuff like that, so that people are aware of the services that they're. This morning we had Brendan Purin, so he's from Purin Law. He was talking from a lawyer's perspective about the duty to accommodate and why that should be important.
Accommodation is a two-way street. So employees have an obligation to inform their employer of their disability and need to accommodation. So the duty to accommodate is triggered upon this request. Again, the idea that if a person approaches an employer and asks for a disability, the employer is not allowed. I mean, it seems like common sense, but we do sometimes see this. The employer is not allowed to take any kind of punitive action against that employee with respect to the request for accommodation. If they do, there are significant fines that the employer can face, up to $25,000.
The JOIN organizers asked me to come and speak on the duty to accommodate. So most of the information that I conveyed to the audience was around employers' obligations with respect to fulfilling that duty to accommodate, specifically related to people with disabilities. So addressing barriers in the workplace and how employers may be able to overcome some of those barriers in the workplace, working with people with disabilities to ensure that accessible accommodations are in place and individualized accommodation plans are in place. And I also touched on some of the requirements of the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act, the AODA, again with a focus on the employment standard and regulations. What really triggers the employer's obligations is the employee requesting the accommodation. And they don't necessarily, they're not obligated to identify a diagnosis, but really what they're doing is identifying the limitations that they may have and possibly a prognosis, so far as that prognosis would influence the accommodation that the employer is trying to put in place.
We also had the CICE panel, so they came from different colleges to talk about the program that they have for people with disabilities, specifically intellectual disabilities, and how they transition them into work placement.
Rebecca Duar, a Field Placement Officer for Community Integration through Cooperative Education, or CICE, at Georgian College, was one of the panel members.
So my job is about finding field placements for students, and our students in our program have varying levels of different disabilities. So I like to think of my job as a relationship builder. So I focus on the student and what interests they have and setting them up with an employer who will also get along with the student and will be able to suit the needs of both the employment as well as the student.
For the employer expectations. So employer expectations of the placement, are they the same as what would happen in competitive employment, or would they be different, or how would that be, how would they differ?
So I think our students match up fairly well, keeping in mind that our students are going into entry-level type work, right? Like we're not having students going in to be CEOs of companies or anything like that. But for the most part, once our students have overcome that interview, and they are given the opportunity to, disclose what accommodations they might need, I would say, 90% of the time, the expectations have been met. Our students, when I think of their strengths, they have a certain skill set and their brains work differently than my brain, right? And that's what I'm always trying to say. Like, every single person has a skill that they can bring to the workplace. It's just finding that fit and that right job, and maybe there might be some job development that needs to be done, right? So I usually encourage students as well as employers to look for those spots that are missing in their workforce, and maybe we can find a job and develop a job and find a student that will be able to suit that properly.
When we return, we'll meet the amazing keynote speakers and hear their incredibly inspiring stories.
AMI Inside will return. This is AMI Inside.
Welcome back to the 14th Annual Join Conference. John Robinson, Managing Partner, CEO, and founder of Our Ability, an organization that provides inclusive workforce and employment consulting, mentoring, and workshops, was born a congenital amputee. He shares his story as the first keynote speaker at the event.
We, Our Ability, I exist, in essence, to help others have what I didn't have. So this conference today, Join, is bringing the business community in the Toronto, Ontario area with the developmental disability community. And so everything that we stand for with employment of individuals with disabilities, this is perfect. My mission is to spread the word that there is an ability within all of us to do something, and there is value in employment for everybody. So if we start with that, then we have to figure out how do we make the pegs and the holes fit together and find employment opportunities for everybody. So I went to Syracuse University, one of the best communication schools in the United States. I had a great GPA. I ended up with a 3.4 grade point average. I had a great internship at a TV station in Boston in the summer before I graduated. I had references. And I graduated in 1990 with all that behind me, and I heard the word no for 4.5 years. 4.5 years, hundreds of resumes, thousands of help wanted ads, 25-second interviews in person, trying to get myself dressed, driving around the northeast of North America to hear the word no. From Chicago to Montreal, Washington, D.C., Boston, New York, and all points in between, I would scramble to get a tie on, and I would come meet you for the second interview and hear the word no. You're underqualified, you're overqualified, you've taken too long out of college. And what were they really saying? They didn't like how I looked. You see, I didn't look the part. I didn't wear the three-piece suit. I wasn't 6 feet tall. I didn't look like the part of somebody that was going to sell advertising. 1994, 4.5 years later, December 1994, I finally get a job opportunity, ironically right back in Syracuse, New York, where I went to college. The local sales manager had interviewed me twice, and I was being called in for a third interview. And I got called into the third interview, and I thought maybe I had a chance this time. And the local sales manager started out by saying, "John, My boss does not want me to hire you. See, he doesn't know how he's going to fire you when it doesn't work out. But I agreed to a deal. He said, I can hire you, but I cannot give you a salary, I cannot give you benefits, and I cannot give you a sales territory. But we do want you to sell advertising. We'll print you business cards. Will you take the job? Yeah, I took that job. I took that job, and in December of 1994, I had $17,000 in new business advertising sales on that TV station. At the end of my first full year, I was the #1 new business salesperson, not only for that station, but the 9 other stations they owned around the country. January 1996, the very first sales meeting, I knew I had finished #1, and I pretty much bounced into that sales meeting that morning and couldn't wait to be announced as the sales winner going off to Key West, Florida. And they announced that the #2 person was going to go to Key West, Florida, because they looked the part. Okay? I know how this works. But I didn't give up. I worked at that TV station for 5 years, and when I resigned, I was their youngest salesperson still, their longest tenured because everybody else had left, including the sales managers, and I was the highest paid employee at that TV station because of the commission I made. But you know what? I wanted it, and I craved it, and I just needed an opportunity. Your best friend, your mate, your significant other, they love you no matter whether there's toothpaste on your teeth, whether your hair's out of place, no matter what it is. And imagine that for a minute. What could you do if you started your day and you thought about what my best friend sees? Would that change your day as you move forward? Would that change your mindset? Instead of seeing what's wrong with myself, you see what's right with yourself, and then you go about your day? Wouldn't that dramatically impact you? I want you to think about the challenges that you have in your daily life and how can you turn them around. And I want you to do that because that is how we will help make this problem of employment of people with disabilities start to alleviate and lessen and create great opportunities for wonderful people. Thank you very much for listening. I very much appreciate it.
Jean-Paul Bedard is an elite endurance athlete, author, and international advocate for survivors of sexual violence. He attended the conference to share his remarkable story of overcoming adversity.
I suffer from a disability that you may not be able to see. As I was introduced, I'm an elite endurance athlete. I've run over 160 marathons all around the world. On a typical week, I average between 200 and 240 kilometers of running a week, all year long. People look at me and they think, oh my God, that guy is strong. That guy is resilient. I also suffer from PTSD. In fact, I was in my PTSD support group yesterday. I still am with CAMH. My CAMH file is massive. In addition to that, I suffer from the after effects of childhood trauma. So I'm going to talk about all of these things. So I too believe that people like me have a lot to offer in the workplace. I grew up in a very violent home, so I was scared a lot as a kid. My mom was very violent to me as a child. And because of that violence, I ended up looking for ways to stay out of the house. And one of the ways was sports. And I excelled in sports. I did really well in sports. I was captain of the hockey team and the baseball team and a rising track athlete. But because I was involved at such high-level sports at such a young age, I spent a lot of time out of the care of my father, because my mother had already left the house at this point. And when I was 9 years old, I was sexually abused by a hockey coach who had been entrusted with my care. And I remember telling my father about it, and he was very upset, not at me, but at what had happened. But we didn't really resolve it. It was never really resolved. It was just something that was left with me, a 9-year-old, to just sit with. But unfortunately, that wasn't the only time sexual violence entered my life. When I was a little bit older, a young teenager, I was violently raped in a ravine by 2 men. And because of the trauma that I experienced as a kid, I needed to make myself not feel better, but just feel nothing. And so I quickly turned to drugs and alcohol. And so from the age of 14 onwards, I'd become an alcoholic and a drug user. And that just kept going and going and going, and it got worse and worse. A big catastrophic event happened, and I decided I couldn't drink anymore. I was going to lose my wife, and I was going to lose my young son. So I entered a treatment program. And when I was in this treatment program to address the addiction issues, I met two guys who were training for a marathon. And they said, "Hey, JP, come on out and train with us." So I said, "Yeah, okay, I'll do that." Because you know what? Addicts do that. We just like, yeah, something's happening, I'm there. So I did this. And we would meet every Sunday, and we would run for 2 or 3 hours, and we would complain, and we would moan. And it was never about how hard the running was. It was about how no one understood us now that we were sober. And no one understands how hard it is not to do the one thing that you desperately want to do. Well, the thing is, I got really successful running. I started to do very well, and some of that success that I had as a kid in athletics came back to me. But the most important thing is, in meeting these men, these two men, every Sunday for 5 months, what happened was, people say that the opposite of addiction is sobriety. I'm here to tell you that's not true. The opposite of addiction is connection. I started to connect to these two men. And in the process, I was showing up every week. I was accountable. They were depending on me, and I was setting a goal and living up to that goal. We all ran the marathon, and we all qualified for the Boston Marathon in our first marathon. Now, if you're not familiar with running, that's a good thing. So I started running 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 marathons, and now we're up to over 160 of these things around the world. My story tends to resonate with a lot of people who are overcoming challenges in their lives. And definitely this conference is about recognizing that challenges are not really an impediment in people's lives. They are opportunities, especially for employers to bring in a different nuance or a different perspective into their company. So I think that's primarily why I was invited.
We will return after the break to wrap up the Join Conference with a special presentation.
AMI Inside will return. This is AMI Inside.
Welcome back. Conference organizer Emily Mahoney introduces us to the final workshop of the event.
And then our last workshop is from Employable Me. So we put together a panel of the people that were represented in the show. And we thought it was great that all of them are local, and just to have them as a figure for people to see, yes, I can hire people with disabilities, and it's not this big struggle, there's ways to go about it, and so that everyone can just have a career and long life goals.
AMI's Andrew Morris hosted the workshop panel focused on employers who are advocates for hiring persons with disabilities.
So if you haven't seen the show, you are missing out. It's very popular. It is produced by Thomas Howe Associates, and Thomas Howe is with us in the audience today. Hello, Thomas. And so basically what the show is all about is we follow 12 job seekers living with vision loss or a neurological condition such as Tourette syndrome, Asperger syndrome, Down syndrome, or ADHD. And the purpose of the series is it aims to help job seekers tap into their inherent talents and change employers' perceptions and hiring practices. So with that, we brought a little trailer, and Emily's going to cue that up just so that you can have a feel for what the show looks like.
Meet the extraordinary job seekers.
What are your skills?
Sorry, what's the question again?
Whose brains are wired differently.
I'm autistic and extremely underemployed.
I was the only blind person.
I have Tourette syndrome.
Asperger's.
OCD.
I really want a job.
They're struggling to crack the job market.
This is my job failed applications.
I applied to close to 400 jobs. I was just wondering if you're hiring. Applying and applying and applying and applying.
I'm here for an interview.
Thank you so much. Can I get a hug?
Let's do a handshake.
I might be in danger of not having a job ever.
Mine's been awful. No, it hasn't been awful.
I have 5 weeks to get a paycheck.
I really need to make some money now.
But with the help of top experts,
Yes? No?
they'll uncover their unique abilities.
That was really amazing.
If they can harness ADHD, it's probably one of the greatest strengths they could possibly have.
And finally, step onto the career ladder.
There will be success because I won't settle for anything else.
I'm ready to offer you a job.
I was smiling nonstop.
Oh, I'm so proud of you, Thomas.
I feel like a legend in my uniform. It is my destiny.
This is Employable Me, Canada.
Come on, give me a chance.
An AMI original production.
Our 3 panelists today were featured in the show and really represent the forward thinking that we really wanted to feature with the program in terms of hiring practices and making accommodations for people with disabilities in the workforce. So on my far right to your far left is Ruthie Bird. Ruthie is a founder of the Lunch Lady Group, and then we have Ryan Shorten. Ryan is Director of Operations for Pizza Nova. And beside me is Michelle Deslip, Human Resources for Amsterdam Brewing. So welcome, everybody. Thank you for being here. Why don't we start with Ruthie? We'll go right to the very end here. Why you wanted to participate in the show and how the values of the show resonated to what the Lunch Lady is all about.
I think sometimes we look at work in a like in a big sort of broadcast, sort of widespread way that everybody is going to be working full time, or there's a certain expectation of what work means when we think about it. And I think it's not that at all. I think it's whatever fills a need for the employer and whatever fills a need for the person seeking the job. So that's what I learned from Employable Me. So it was empowering in so many ways for me personally and just wonderful for our company.
So Ryan, your episode involved a gentleman named Riley who has Asperger's syndrome. And what was your experience like with Riley? And maybe tell us a little bit about how he's progressed over time as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. Yeah, it was a really great opportunity, as Ruth said, for us. Pizza Nova's been around for over 50 years, and and one of our tenets is community, and certainly giving back. But as Ruthie said, inclusiveness. We've worked a lot of years now with Variety Village here in Toronto and raised over $1 million for that organization. So when we were approached with this through connections of working on another show, we certainly jumped at the chance.
Before we close, we wanted to ask keynote speaker John Robinson if he feels that after 20-plus years of being an advocate, things have progressed enough for people with a disability.
With disability, we've come a long way in 20-plus years. We're good at certain things. We're really good at curb cuts, bathrooms, doors. We're good at the physical nature of disability. We're good at being inclusive in grammar schools and junior high schools and high schools. We're good through the public school system. We're fairly good at secondary and universities and colleges. There's a huge drop-off once we get to employment. So we've done a generational change. It hasn't translated into that next generation into employment. So we're getting 53% of people with disabilities to graduate university. That's fantastic in Ontario. That means unemployment rate for individuals with disabilities should be much lower than it is. So we're at that point that employment now becomes the most important thing.
That's it for this edition of AMI Inside. Thanks for watching.
Producer, Arthur Pressick. Editors, Mariam Bakhtiar, Arthur Pressick. Videographers, Arthur Pressick, Ryland Valley. Narrator, Melissa Keith. Integrated Describe Video Specialist, Emily Harding. Audio Post, Mark Phoenix. Production Supervisor, Jennifer Johnson. Director Production, Kara Nye. Director Programming, AMI TV, Brian Perdue. Vice President Programming and Production, John Melville. President and CEO, David Arrington. Copyright 2018, Accessible Media Incorporated.